Today's session is sponsored by Julio. Julio allows you to create and share immersive virtual reality experiences with 3D software you already use. It works with 3ds Max, SketchUp, Rhino, V-Ray, and Corona. Julio lets you drag and drop your 360s into the platform and gives you a backlink to a VR experience you can share with your clients on your own website or on social media. It supports both VR headsets and browser views, so nothing gets in the way of sharing your vision. Julio really has made VR a simple, practical tool for business. You can enhance your design with navigational hotspots, audio annotations, and see analytics and heat mapping to give you a greater insight on who was viewing your design and how they interacted with it. You can get a free Julio account and start making your first VR experience in minutes. Free accounts never expire, and you don't need a credit card to get started. Visit julio.com/Ronen to find out more. That is YULIO.com/Ronen. That is RONEN. Visit julio.com/Ronen to find out more today. Hi everyone and welcome to The Spectrum. I'm your host Ronen Beckerman and this is my weekly experiment exploring the creative minds of architectural visualization, finding out what makes us all tick and push our limits. This week I'm joined by Lon Grohs from Chaos Group Los Angeles. You probably know Lon from his days at Neoscape, but today he's an integral member of the Chaos Group executive team overseeing company strategy and brand. Founder of the Chaos Group Labs, a collaborative research and development hub for artists, industry leaders and developers, and also responsible for building strategic partnerships with leading design technology companies such as Adobe, Autodesk, NVIDIA, and Google. In this session, we'll focus mainly on the concept of 6 degrees of freedom in VR and hopefully learn a little bit more about Lon. For those of you attending SOA Academy number 8 this weekend, you'll get a chance to meet him and play with some cool demos he's arranging for us over there. Here we go everyone, session number 11 with Lon Grohs from Chaos Group. Grab a bucket and let's roll! So, nice to meet you.
Yeah, and it's good to talk again. I think we've met before at State of Art, maybe a couple of years ago in Venice.
Yeah, and I think we had a call with Chris Nichols and yourself. I think I don't remember when, but I think we did discuss before.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure not often enough. Like we probably should. So it's nice that Colin set this thing up.
Definitely.
So tell me what's on the agenda today, because I have my own thing, but I'd really like to know what's the main aim for you, Lon, with this interview.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have a lot of things cooking, a lot of really interesting stuff that's happening on the horizon. I'm not sure if you saw the posts yesterday, but we started to drop some news out there about working on V-Ray for Unreal.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that one.
So, in fact, it's been something that's on, it's been on our radar for a while. We've just been thinking about how to approach it in the most meaningful way. And so that's something, that's technology that we're working on. It's pretty early on, so there's no schedule or anything that we can commit to. But the idea is that we know that people are very interested in trying to see their projects in real time, especially for the purposes of AR and VR. And we want to come up with as many ways as possible, I think, to get our customers there however they want to be there. So that's one way. One way is to make sure that we build a bridge to the real-time engines that our customers are using. Primarily, I think you've probably run into this in ArchViz, that Unreal seems to be the one with the most traction right now. But that doesn't preclude us from working on other things like Unity, or in fact the Stingray connection. The guys working on the Max interactive VR just released that with 2018.1. So we're excited that they're making it an effort to translate V-Ray assets and materials, etc., over to Stingray. That's kind of on the real-time front.
Okay.
But we're really working on, something that we were showcasing at the Immersive Architecture event and talking about a lot lately is, a couple of years ago when we introduced just the ability to do stereoscopic, cube maps or stereoscopic spherical images, there was this, a major uptick in people's generation of 3 Degrees of Freedom VR content. In fact, some of the customers that we talk to now, they just do it as a matter of course. They render out something as a stereo cube map and they throw it in their Gear VR and they look at it because it gives them an opportunity to look at their scene at scale. One of the things that I'm excited about, because my background is in architecture and ArchViz, and I explain to people that to me VR is kind of an architectural superpower, because if you think about it, right, since the beginning of time we've trained ourselves to work in miniature. We draw at scale, we build scale models, right? We do all of these things in miniature, and we've gotten so good at it that we kind of forgot the point that if we didn't have to, we wouldn't. And with VR, now suddenly you can enter a space well before it's built easily and look at it and experience it and make decisions that you maybe couldn't before. So, we're hoping that we can open up the door to better design, better visualizations, maybe better sales process. And 3 Degrees of Freedom is great, and it's nice that it's simple, but what we've found is the first thing that happens when somebody puts on, their headset is they want to move a little bit, right? They want to have that feeling where you can move your head and be more immersed in the experience, and that's where 6 Degrees of Freedom really comes in. And 6 Degrees of Freedom is something that we want to be able to do in multiple ways, right? But I think the regular way or the ordinary way that people think about is to go to some kind of real-time engine like an Unreal, etc., and have that experience. But there's a process there that's not as easy as just rendering out your cube maps, right?
Yeah, there's a leap to be made before you can even.
And so what we want to do is we actually are working on ways to make it easier for you to just render straight out of your V-Ray scene and get to 6 Degrees of Freedom.
Okay.
And that's going to be a solution for certain things, right? When you want to just take a scene, quickly look at it, not go through all the hoops that you might go through with a real-time engine, but be able to just have it in there and not change your whole entire pipeline or your process to do it.
So this 6 Degrees of Freedom, and if I take a little bit to what you said about being an architect. So I have an architecture background as well. So I studied architecture. I think my story is similar to yours. I just didn't graduate. So after 4 years of architecture school and working for 3 years in an office, I decided that, seeing my design in an image was enough for me. And so I went into visualization. But I'm in visualization because of architecture. And I think that VR has to, architects stand to gain the most, probably first, but also the most from VR, just because what you said, feeling the actual scale of the things they design and actually go inside and see it and feel it and understand more, understand exactly what it's going to be like, if table is too tall, if the window is too low and things like that. But when you say 6 Degrees of Freedom, okay, so what does that exactly mean? Is it still an isolated experience in a specific spot? Is it something that you can freely, like a path, you can freely walk on and get that 6 Degrees of Freedom, or is it something else?
Sure. So 6 degrees of freedom just in and of itself means that you have the ability to move around freely within a volume. And so in the cases that I'm talking about, let's call them a volume experience, a room scale experience.
Okay.
And I think until the until the headsets and the tracking and stuff are there to do much bigger experiences, that's generally what we're finding, is that a space of between 2 to 3 meters by 2 to 3 meters is about the extent of what people are kind of comfortable walking around tethered. In fact, most people, when they put a Vive or an Oculus on, they stick within an even much more limited area, probably a meter by a meter. But the idea is that with 6 degrees of freedom, as you tilt your head and you move around and you take a step forward or backward or whatever, the immersion is always there because you're tracked.
Okay. So the experience is much more natural.
Exactly. Whereas, when you have a Gear VR, it's just it's 3 degrees of freedom. You're just looking at a static cube map.
Okay. So where does that come in terms of leveraging the VR experience? What can you do with this before we go into actually what it is you need to do to get to that point? But once you have it, then what are the main benefits besides the naturality of things?
The main benefits are that you now have, and what we're trying to do is try to give you the most realistic, in our case, photorealistic, but you may choose to make something look like a model or something, but let's say what we're really aiming at is the most photorealistic and most natural experience that you can have inside of a virtual space.
Okay.
And so what we want to be able to do is have you enter that space and feel exactly like you were there.
Okay. And how does the technology already put in place in terms of facilitating this kind of creation? I'm working with the V-Ray on 3ds Max. Is there new things I need to learn before I can actually implement this kind of output?
So that's the beauty. I mean, what we're doing is we're working with a couple of different partners. Of course, we're responsible for the rendering tech, right? And the workflow that people are used to. And some of our technology partners are the ones who are experienced in taking that, taking those assets and bringing them into a volumetric VR experience. The two that I'll talk about now, one is a company called Nozone, and we announced, I think last year at SIGGRAPH, we announced that we were partnering with them to help bring this technology forward. And they have a system that allows for pre-rendered 6 degrees of freedom in a plugin called Presens, Presenz. Since that time, last SIGGRAPH, Nozone was acquired by a company called Starbreeze, and Starbreeze happens to also be a company that's working on something called the Star VR headset, which to date I think is their headset is affiliated with IMAX and so on. They're trying to produce the most crystal clear, highest resolution headset possible. Okay. So they're trying to kind of connect these two technologies.
Okay, so this is Nozone. I'm familiar with them. And,
this is Nozone. You're familiar with that. So the idea is that we want to get it to a point where essentially from your scene you can click a button, have it render to the right formats that Presence needs for its viewer, and basically have it live within however long it takes to render. Okay. The second technology, and that's a really great tech. There are some limitations in terms of exactly what you're going to get from your scene, but for the most part, it's simpler, it's faster, and it's better looking than what you would get out of an equivalent of trying to get into another game engine. So this is doing it without a game engine.
So basically mostly hand-free in terms of the user. You just use V-Ray the way you know it, and the plugin and Nozone takes care of the rest to create the output that you need.
Yeah, that's the idea. Exactly.
Okay.
And then so the next level of tech would be a light field, right?
Okay.
And a light field technology is what I would consider the pinnacle, the most realistic representation that you would get inside of a volumetric VR experience. And the reason that is, and the difference is, that you will have view-dependent reflections and refractions.
Okay.
So that means is I'm in that space, and a demo that we were showing recently had some glass vases and things on there. It's ray traced. It's all pre-rendered, ray traced imagery. So what I expect to see as I move my perspective is I expect to see the reflections change and the refractions change, and it works. So it's another level of realism or another level of immersion that is just absolutely convincing.
Okay.
And we're working with a company called Lytro, who, a few years ago, they were kind of widely known for their camera. Did you ever see their camera that you could adjust the focus?
Exactly, yeah.
After the fact. So that was their, one adoption of their light field technology. They're also using light fields to come up with really great and interesting, cinematic cameras, where they have, sort of depth information that comes from, what you're filming. The challenge there is that because we're still kind of early in our collaborations, what we really need to work on next is making sure that we have as many optimizations as possible. So the demos that we're creating right now, let's call them sort of more brute force as technology previews. And so the next step is to find ways where we can reduce the amount of rendering or make it easier, etc. And that's kind of the process that we're working on. Okay.
Can you elaborate maybe about the difference between the method Nozone is implementing to the light field method? I have kind of like a vague idea about how light field works when it comes to hardware, like the camera Lytro introduced initially. But when you do that in CG, then what's the equivalent? Is it like rendering a lot of cube maps to create the entire volume or the entire space, or is it something different?
Well, I can't speak to exactly what's under the hood in both of those circumstances. The big difference is that with a light field, every view is going to have a view-dependent reflection and refraction. And in the Nozone, that is going to be sort of a shared reflection refraction. Okay. And honestly, most people, and I imagine, if I put myself in a chair where I was showing this to my clients, and if I was, still working in visualization, showing it to my clients, my guess is that most people aren't going to be that aware of the nuance. It's pretty nuanced, the difference, depending on the scene. If it's something that is, as an example, when we were in Venice, we met this really amazing artist that was showing work from Vanini Glass. And Vanini Glass is a very famous, glass sculpture company in Murano in Venice. So it's sort of the heart of glass sculpture. And he showed these renderings where reflections and refractions are essential for their product, what they're doing. If they're creating this, gorgeous chandelier, they need to have all of those view-dependent reflections, refractions, because that is the material. If they try to put that into a real-time engine, it just looks kind of odd and fake. The Nozone equivalent would be very good, but you're still going to have kind of a fixed point reflection, refraction. and light field would be as if you were pretty much there.
So these two technologies bring you allow you to experience the space in a way that you couldn't experience until now. But besides these two, you mentioned game engines like Unreal Engine. So how does that translate into this kind of medium?
So if you could imagine, one of the things that I always say about the real-time engine is go there when you're going to use it for something exciting or interesting or something interactive.
Okay.
And so I could imagine that if you were going to, create an interactive experience and you wanted to do things like swap in and out, curtain wall systems or make changes to the model, etc., then having that in real time is great because it's interactive. If you're really just trying to show somebody what a space is going to look like and have them experience it, then I'm not sure that that's the solution. But you could connect them, right? You could have a more open world where you could walk through a space and experience all these different parts of it. And then when you wanted to see that particular area completely photorealistically, you could enter into a volume experience, or you could transition into, kind of the fully realized version right from within your interactive. Yeah. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, it's a hybrid solution. That's really interesting. But again, let me ask you this, and this is something that I'm basing off of my own experience in our studio doing visualizations for clients. There still seems to be a lot of friction in terms of actually using the hardware with clients and getting these kinds of experiences actually to people to experience them. Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Showing a still image still works. It will always work. Standard animations, they work as well. I don't really think VR is already figured out in terms of what we can do with it with a client, right? Like for marketing purposes. Some companies do this, I think, pretty well, like Steel Blue in the US and others. I'm pretty sure VR is going to be amazing if used during the design process, if it's going to be used by the architects themselves, if it's going to be used by 3D artists doing visualization, because then you really have real-time feedback and you have it in VR, so you can actually have more potential in terms of how you create the content before you even show it to the client. So do you have this kind of, different paths in terms of your approach, or is it all unified? You think of everyone like in the same bucket in terms of the solution, or do you kind of like segment the ones creating the content and the one actually experiencing the content once it goes out to marketing?
So, I mean, the way that I see it is we have a responsibility to make it simple enough and easy enough that it can be used throughout the entire process. And we want it to be, one of the reasons that we want it to be a one-click solution is we want anybody who's designing a building to be able to quickly, put this in there, have a review it with their team, review it with their client well before the thing is finalized or ready to market. Because I agree with you. I think that's part of the power of what this offers is you can now make decisions because I say you can visualize it life size, right? That's the beauty of it. We're finding that because of the technological barriers, right? There are barriers, whether it's software and hardware, that there are front runners who tend to be on the higher scale of kind of putting up with tech. Hopefully those barriers will begin to go away so that it does become easier, so that it does become more commonplace for people to be able to put on a headset. And hopefully we can get rid of the tethering, and we can get rid of the having to have special tracking, etc., so that it just, all of that becomes more fluid and natural. Right now, we're in this like volatile experimentation phase, right? We've got to do as many experiments as possible before we can, come out the other end with a really elegant, easy solution.
Yeah, it takes time to test everything out. This session is sponsored by Axis Design, the makers of Anima, the all-in-one crowd management tool developed to make the process of adding 3D people to your still images and animations fast and easy. Find out more about Anima and their 3D people library by clicking on their link or banner in the show notes. So maybe we can talk a little bit about you. You've been in this industry working since, I think, 2001 when you started with Neoscape, I think, right? Am I correct?
Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah, and coming from, you're an architect, you worked as an architect. So, and tell me, right now at Chaos, what is your mandate? Well, what is your main role within the company?
What I always say is it's my job to try to unlock the doors, as many doors that we have in front of us as possible, or that our customers have. And VR is one of those doors. I'm obviously very passionate about that. But there are so many things that I think that are still, pretty exciting stuff. One area that I'm also kind of happy to have had a part in is last year, we worked with the folks at Adobe and their project Felix, which is still in beta. But as a concept, I've always felt like rendering is this power to visualize is something that we kind of have a responsibility to put in as many hands of artists and designers as possible. Because who knows what that can bring, right? Adobe had this idea for an application that was really sort of 3D, not like we see a Max or a Maya or anything like that. 3D for somebody who's never even thought about 3D or touched it. Somebody who's a graphic designer or a Photoshop artist, and I love that idea of democratizing 3D and visualization so that we can see where that can take us. I know personally the kind of joy that I've had in working in that and visualizing projects and seeing them built, and I still run into an occasional project that's just finished construction, and it doesn't have to be at that scale. I mean, any scale. I think of my 2-year-old daughter, right? And she's going to look at technology in a very different way. It'll be so kind of more seamless. And who knows what ideas she'll be able to explore or visualize by the time she's 8 or 10 or whatever, because hopefully we'll have some of these things solved.
I mean, we lived in a time where we shifted from the dial phone into the iPhone. Some kids today, they don't even know what it was like to use those devices. So, I mean, now we have these headsets and they are tethered. So, like 5 years from now, it could be as simple glasses, or just it would be so part of your normal life. You just don't think about it. It has many implications, moral implications, legal implications. Wyeth, I think, the name from Epic, had a really great talk at the State of Art Academy Day, the previous one, and he described a world which is really fascinating using the Unreal Engine as a sort of like an operating system, like a real-time operating system, which I think, hearing what Chaos Group is doing with V-Ray, seems to me quite similar. So you have V-Ray in Photoshop, you have V-Ray in, I think, Nuke, right? So it's like things are powered by V-Ray. So it becomes like a
Yes.
rendering operating system of sorts that you can inject into many, many, many platforms, and then you can provide this kind of benefits and tools to anyone who's just ready to use them, which is a unique approach. So besides this, what else are you planning within this scope of operation in terms of VR in real time? Besides NoZone, besides Light Field, are there any other interesting things that are coming up soon or a little bit later down the road?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right in terms of V-Ray as a platform or as an OS. And as a matter of fact, we just recently announced our application SDK, which is exactly that. It basically allows anybody who has an idea for an application that they want to create, and they want ray tracing, they want rendering, then they can leverage what we've already created. They can leverage the 20 years of optimizations and all of that have been put into place. So, let's say I really want to see in the future, I want to see it get to the point where we can have ray traced AR in a meaningful, fast way, right? To me, that's very exciting. And so who knows? I mean, the next generation of somebody, once hardware aligns and software aligns and the business needs happen, I think ray traced AR is going to be exceptionally cool and incredibly valuable for a lot of different things. I mean, not just the kind of easy ones where you go, well, if I walk up to a site and I want to put my glasses on and see exactly what that building will look like, I could do that and see it in context. I think we would be able to use that in all facets of our life. It's a little scary because I'm not sure, our brains are wired for it yet. But I mean, I don't know. I think that's something that I'm very excited about.
Yeah, I think as long as you manage to fake the experience for the body well, then it makes no difference. It will reach the point that it actually makes no difference. I mean, visually, it will look realistic. If you put in all the other sensory devices for sound, for touch, chemicals, then you can recreate a lifelike experience. I don't know how farther along down the road that is, but I'm pretty sure people are thinking and working on these kinds of potential experiences, which is really exciting. There seems to be a lot of architects involved in things that are other than being an architect, other than actually designing and building buildings, right? And I would really love to hear from you. What do you think that training, that education brings into your current role? Maybe even you can describe what it brought to you a little bit back, like when the days at Neoscape. One thing that I can think about is, as an architect, you kind of like orchestrate many people involved in a project. Each one comes from another discipline. So in that regard, your current position is kind of like the same. If I read your current position, so what do you have to say about this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I have a sort of a profound love for architecture, and we were just having a podcast the other day. Chris and I talked with Tom Main from Morphosis, who's happens to be a neighbor of ours in our office here in LA, and we talked about the same thing about the architectural education. Because we joke. I had a professor that once said, like, he became an architect because he saw they were up all night smoking, and so he saw that the lights were on, and he thought those were people that he wanted to hang out with, and that's where they ended up. But I think it prepares you for a lot in terms of critical thinking and problem solving. I appreciate it because it's always a little different. I think that, and this is no offense to anybody who works in finance or anything like that. It's just that I wasn't wired to kind of sit and and spend a lot of time doing
numbers,
spreadsheets and the same thing. And I just really was drawn to the creative side. And I think it was, it was a very specific experience at the architecture firm I was working for. I had an amazing opportunity there. I was actually, kind of out of school, was running IT systems for, a 60-person architecture firm. And I had a lot of opportunities to do graphics and charrettes and 3D stuff. And that was great. But I remember one of the guys, one of the principals in charge, who was a Harvard grad. And I remember him being on the phone with a customer, and he must have been on the phone for, I would say, 2 hours. And they were talking about the differences between like tan, beige, and taupe curtains. And I'll never forget, I was thinking like, I don't ever want to do that. I don't aspire to, to kind of reach a point where that's
on a
the
daily
conversation
basis
that I'm having. And I sort of knew that maybe that world of architecture itself wasn't for me, but the creative side, the visual side, working on the illustrations and then later photography and so on, that was something that really appealed to me. And I had a passion for it and a drive. And I'll never forget, it was around that time when there was a conference called Build Boston. And I went there, and Neoscape had a booth. And they had some images up there that said, there's some great renderings, probably some of the best renderings I'd seen at the time. And it said, do you know Form Z? Do you know, this and that? And of course, those weren't my applications, but I was like, I need to find out more about this, because I can't believe that there's a company that just does that just does visualization. And I met the guys, we hit it off, and I got the firm that I was working with, the architecture firm, through the Y2K transition, which, turned out to be a lot less significant than we all thought it might be. But, an IT person in the year 2000, or from 1999 to 2000 was a little dicey. And once we made that transition, I went over to Neoscape and kind of never looked back. And, we grew the company from what at the time was 5 people to 60 or 70 people. I think they might be up to 80 now with the 2 offices in Boston and New York. It was exciting because we were inventing stuff as we went along, right? There was no roadmap. There was now I'm sort of jealous, because you can go onto TurboSquid and you can get all these models, or you can find material libraries and so many things that are out there. And at the same time, I want more of that. I want to put more of that out there, because I think that the better starting point we can give people, the more that they'll be able to achieve down the line. And so, I spent it was 12 years at Neoscape, and I got to say it was amazing. The guys there are like family still. I'm still proud of the work that we were able to do, and the work that they
Well, you got to work from the very beginning of our field, so it was a pretty defining period that you were part of at Neoscape, part of the first group of companies actually doing architecture visualization. I remember I was very inspired by works from Neoscape, from D-Box, AMD, Hayes Davidson in London. So yeah, since 2000, I got into this in 2002 when I started architecture school, essentially, after I left the Israeli Navy, where I was for 7 years. So it was quite a bit of a shift for me.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a little bit of a difference.
I was always drawing from very early age. My father was a civil engineer, so I was always looking at drawings of buildings. I think when I first realized that what he drew on paper It took me one day to, to one of the houses he was designing. So I think then I was probably, I think 7 or 8. It dawned on me, like, that thing that was a piece of drawing on his table, I'm now looking at it, and I'm going inside that house. And that was an amazing, moment for me to understand that you can draw something on paper, and then it can become a real house in the real world. So I think that was the seed that later on, I studied computers, and I was in the Navy. And then when time came for me to decide what it is I want to do in my life, I went back and, decided to go and study something I think I always loved, and it was mostly about drawing, about pictures, less about text, less about, crunching numbers. So that was the thing for me. And the image making was the prime drive for me. So after 4 years, I decided to to open my own studio, and I'm doing visualizations ever since. So really, really, really cool story. And so that experience in Neoscape brought you to Chaos how? I mean, was it you coming to Chaos, or they approached you? What was the genesis of that transition?
Yeah, I mean, I had, I'd known Peter and Vlado for years, since the very early days of V-Ray, and we would see each other at different events. I would, present at the user groups and so on. There was one user group in Boston where they were announcing V-Ray 2.0, and I just sort of on a whim offered to kind of MC it. and Vlado did the demo, and I kind of, was the hype man to talk about the different things that were going on. But it was a technology and a team that I was always sort of excited to be around and believed in. They're just a great team. And in 2011, Chaos Group had officially acquired ASGViz in Baltimore for the SketchUp and Rhino development. And so it was at that point that the guys had planted a flag in the U.S. And I think when that happened, the wheels started to kind of spin in my head about, well, hey, what could we do together? And I had some ideas about where things could head and so on. It also was getting to a point after 12 years at Neoscape. I was getting to a point where things started to feel just sort of like another condo project. And so
you felt the need for change. Yeah.
The kind of the spark was, the spark wasn't there, because it was like, okay, well, it's another condo project and then, another, $45 million second house for somebody. And I just started to think like, well, what if I zoomed out a little bit and expanded, the thinking, and rendering technology was something that I felt like I said earlier, was in a position to maybe, go broader and be sort of more democratized. And we started some conversations back and forth about that and what the opportunities might be. And then in the fall of 2011, I officially joined Chaos Group as a VP of business development. And we originally I was in Boston. I was working out of my house, and then about 6 months later, I moved to Los Angeles, where I've been ever since. Because as you can imagine, Los Angeles is sort of a
number one star,
is a big market for us. It's also a very diverse market, which is exciting because, you get architecture, you get visual effects, you get automotive, aerospace, design, lots of universities. There's kind of a really great combination of things, including research hubs here. We've got proximity to a lot of people that are doing things in computer graphics research. And about 2 years after being here in Los Angeles, kind of said, all right, let's get an official outpost here. And we set up an office and brought Chris Nichols on board for to officially launch Chaos Group Labs. And
cool.
And here we are.
Cool. It's pretty amazing. So the labs, besides the CG Garage, which I listen to pretty frequently, and the things that are coming out that we know about, what's going on in those labs, like on a daily basis?
Yeah. So labs kind of depends on where we are in the cycle of projects and where we are with development resources. Certain things like our foray into VR maybe gets spearheaded in certain ways by labs, or some of our experiments with pushing GPU rendering or pushing cloud rendering. Those are all things that we try to pick certain projects that we can team up with strategic partners, and usually those strategic partners are kind of also maybe also on the software side, but also hardware, and then bring in an artist or a studio or something like that, so that we can kind of take all three of those things and see where we can push it. And I would say that right now we're sort of heavily looking into where we can take VR. So some of the 6 degrees of freedom stuff that I was telling you about are things that we're actively doing with labs right now. We're also working on some things with cloud and GPU rendering too. So it's cool. It's exciting. One of the challenges is that it's very easy to have too many ideas. And so, making sure that you're being selective about those and finding which ones make business sense, etc. There's an evaluation that needs to happen as well, but it is pretty exciting.
Indeed. So, working towards wrapping it up, we're near the hour mark. Are you hiring someone now, specifically looking for someone for the labs that you can maybe share information about here on the podcast for the listeners to kind of like tune in and maybe kind of approach you? You mentioned working with artists, working with studios. How does one reach you to be part of this kind of work, collaborate, or to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a blog. It's labs.chaosgroup.com. And we do have an email, which is labs. I think it's labs@chaosgroup.com.
Okay.
And a Twitter, which is CG_labs. We are working on. So when we started the blog, we didn't have our new website up. We're working on getting the blog transitioned over to the new website, so that all of that stuff will kind of be under one umbrella. And also with a better back-end CMS and all that stuff, which I'm sure you understand from having set up your blog. There's, of course, the CG Garage, which was originally kind of part of Labs, and it is, but it's become its own thing. CG Garage as a podcast sort of stands on its own. And there we've been trying to make sure that we expand in all different directions, bringing in more architecture conversations, design conversations, visual effects, you name it. But if anybody has ideas or projects or, a passion project that they're interested in discussing, the best place is to probably go to labs.chaosgroup.com and hit the contact button or the email button to reach out. Because we're always evaluating new ideas, and we're also hoping to put out some updates to our guides. That's one of the things that we've been trying to do, is create some white papers that give people a head start, whether it comes to GPU rendering or whether it comes to VR. Both of those were very successful, a lot of downloads. But as you can imagine, things change so quickly that they also become quickly out of date.
Yeah.
And so we've got to dedicate a little bit of time this summer, I think, to trying to update those to include some of the newest stuff.
Great. So people know how to reach you, and it was a real pleasure. I appreciate your time, and I think we learned one or two new things here, and looking forward to keep in touch with you and the team so we can hopefully revisit and discuss how VR is progressing and how new things that you're making are progressing, and see where we're taking this visualization within architecture and other fields that are revolving around that. So really, thank you very much, Lon. That concludes this week's session. Big thanks to Lon for doing this interview with me, and you'll see both Lon and myself at the State of Art Academy Day number 8 this weekend, October 6 and 7. Lon will be there with some cool demos, VR demos, and I'll be presenting there for the craft and also for the AAA awards in partnership with the State of Art Academy. So a lot to look forward to. You can find these session highlights, links, and more in the show notes at thespectrum.com. Please send me any feedback you may have about the show and future guests you'd like me to interview. For all those of you attending State of Art Academy Day number 8, look forward to seeing you there. For all of you out there, be good, do good. See you in the next session.